I'm Daniel Carter, 36 years old, and if you told me a year ago that a little doorbell camera would end up exposing an entire HOA board while sending my neighbor's husband to jail, I would have laughed and asked what movie you'd been watching. The funny part is, none of it started because I was looking for trouble. It started because someone decided that seeing what happened on my own front porch was somehow more dangerous than what was actually happening there. I still remember that Tuesday morning because it looked completely ordinary. Arizona sunlight pouring across the driveway, coffee still too hot to drink, my Labrador Cooper waiting by the front door like he expected the mailman to personally deliver him a steak. Then I opened my mailbox and found an overnight violation notice from the Desert Ridge Community Association. Bright red letters across the top. Emergency enforcement action. $675. Remove my video doorbell within 72 hours or face an additional $200 every single day until it was gone. I actually laughed the first time I read it because I honestly thought somebody had mixed up my address with someone else's. I lived in Desert Ridge outside Scottsdale for almost 4 years. I paid my dues on time, kept my yard clean, waved at neighbors, never blasted music, never parked on the street. I was about as boring as a homeowner could possibly be. My camera wasn't even hidden. It sat right beside the front door, where anyone could see it, exactly like half the houses in America these days. The violation claimed my camera created an unauthorized surveillance hazard under some section of the architectural guidelines I'd never heard of. That sounded ridiculous. So instead of getting angry, I picked up the phone and called the association office. The receptionist transferred me to Monica Hayes, the architectural committee chair, and before I could even finish introducing myself, she spoke with the kind of confidence only people with a little power seem to develop. Mr. Carter, your violation has already been reviewed. The decision is final. I asked how a standard doorbell camera violated community rules when several houses on the next street had identical ones. There was a long pause before she answered, and I can still hear every word because they stuck with me for months. People who feel the need to record everyone around them usually don't fit into communities built on trust. That sentence bothered me far more than the fine itself. It wasn't about the camera anymore. It was personal. I thanked her for her time, hung up, and just stood there staring out my kitchen window. Across the street, old Mrs. Jenkins was watering flowers she'd probably planted before I graduated high school. 2 kids rode bicycles past my driveway. Everything looked peaceful. Exactly the kind of neighborhood people move into because they think nothing bad ever happens there. But I'd spent 6 years working as an investigative reporter before changing careers into corporate communications. And one thing journalism teaches you is that the cleaner something looks on the surface, the more interesting the paperwork usually becomes underneath. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Monica's voice in my head, not because she'd insulted me, but because she'd sounded completely certain nobody would ever question her authority. Around 1:30 in the morning, I finally got out of bed, opened my laptop, and started searching state nonprofit records. Homeowners associations don't just exist because they put up neighborhood signs. They have filings, registrations, renewal dates, financial disclosures, corporate records. Most people never bother looking because they assume someone else already has. I drafted 3 separate public records requests before sunrise, asking for incorporation renewals, nonprofit compliance filings, annual financial statements, and board registration documents. It cost me less than $20 to submit everything. Honestly, I expected to find maybe an accounting mistake or missed signature somewhere, enough to embarrass the board. Maybe convince them to quietly withdraw my fine. That was all. During the following weeks, life returned to normal on the surface. I went to work, walked Cooper every evening, smiled at neighbors, and left my camera exactly where it had always been. But every single night before bed, I checked the cloud recordings out of habit. Mostly it captured delivery drivers, kids selling school fundraiser candy, rabbits wandering across the yard after sunset. Completely ordinary stuff. Then one evening, my next-door neighbor, Eric, casually mentioned that 2 packages had disappeared from his porch over the previous month. A few days later, another neighbor complained about missing medication deliveries. Everyone blamed random porch pirates driving through the neighborhood. Nobody suspected the thefts were happening right under our noses. 46 days after I mailed those records requests, an email landed in my inbox with 6 PDF attachments from the Arizona Corporation Commission. I downloaded them without much excitement, figuring I'd skim them over coffee the next morning. Instead, I opened the first document right there at my desk. And within less than 5 minutes, I realized this wasn't about a doorbell camera anymore. It was about something much bigger. Something the board had desperately hoped nobody in Desert Ridge would ever discover. And at that exact moment, I also had no idea that my little camera had quietly recorded evidence pointing toward an entirely different crime happening just a few feet from my front door. When I opened the second PDF, my stomach actually tightened before my brain caught up with what I was reading. The Desert Ridge Community Association's nonprofit registration had expired almost 9 months earlier. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding the paperwork, because legal filings can be confusing if you don't read them regularly, so I checked the renewal dates again. Then the corporation status. Then the annual compliance reports. Same answer every time. Expired. Administrative dissolution pending. No reinstatement filed. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "No way," because if those records were accurate, the board had been operating without a valid legal entity for months while continuing to collect dues, issue fines, and threaten homeowners with enforcement actions. I called an attorney friend I'd met during my reporting days, Lisa Morgan, and without mentioning my neighborhood by name, I asked a hypothetical question. She listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting me. "Daniel, if your hypothetical is actually real, somebody has some explaining to do." She wouldn't offer formal legal advice over the phone, but she confirmed I wasn't imagining things. The paperwork mattered a lot. I printed every page, highlighted the filing dates, then organized everything into a binder the same way I used to organize investigative stories before publication. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't even angry anymore. I was curious. How does an entire HOA board fail to notice something this basic? Was it incompetence? Was it intentional? Or was everyone simply assuming somebody else had handled it? Over the next several days, I resisted every temptation to confront Monica. If journalism taught me anything, it's that people often reveal far more when they don't know you've already figured out the truth. Instead, I kept living normally. Every evening, Cooper and I walked the neighborhood, smiling at people who had absolutely no idea I was carrying around documents that could potentially invalidate thousands of dollars in HOA fines. One afternoon, Eric stopped me again while dragging his trash bins toward the curb. "Another package disappeared," he said with an exhausted shrug. "My wife ordered birthday gifts for our daughter. Gone." Before I could answer, Mrs. Jenkins walked over from across the street and quietly admitted she'd also lost 2 deliveries over the previous month. Then another neighbor overheard us and mentioned replacement prescription medication that never made it inside her front door. Suddenly, it wasn't isolated anymore. People had simply never compared notes. They assumed porch piracy was random. Listening to everyone talk, I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. My camera stored 60 days of footage automatically in the cloud. I wasn't looking for anything specific at first. I figured maybe I'd spot a suspicious car cruising through the subdivision. Instead, I started with Eric's delivery date and fast-forward through the afternoon. Delivery driver arrived. Package placed on the porch. Everything normal. About 45 minutes later, a man wearing a navy windbreaker casually walked up the driveway like he belonged there, picked up the box, looked around once, and walked away without the slightest hint of urgency. That immediately caught my attention because professional thieves usually move quickly. This guy looked comfortable, confident, like nobody would question why he was there. I zoomed in as much as the recording allowed. Baseball cap, sunglasses, gray beard, nothing obvious. Then he turned sideways for just a second while stepping off the porch, and my heart skipped. I knew that profile. I'd seen him grilling burgers during neighborhood cookouts. I'd watched him helping decorate for the annual 4th of July picnic. It was Richard Hayes, Monica's husband. I actually paused the video and laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it seemed completely impossible. Surely I had the wrong person. I replayed it again. Same result. Then I searched every afternoon over the previous 6 weeks. 1 recording became 3. 3 became 7. Different houses, different clothing, same man. Sometimes he carried empty shopping bags. Other times he simply tucked smaller packages under his arm and kept walking. He never ran, never looked nervous. It was almost like he convinced himself he had every right to take whatever sat outside someone else's home. By midnight, I had a spreadsheet listing dates, times, addresses, clothing descriptions, delivery confirmations, and corresponding video files. Old habits die hard. Investigative reporting is really just organized curiosity. The next morning, I knocked on Eric's door and asked him not to say anything until he watched something. We sat at his kitchen table while I played the footage. He stared without speaking until Richard picked up the package. Then, he slowly leaned back in his chair and said, "You've got to be kidding me." His wife covered her mouth. Neither of them could believe someone they'd chatted with during neighborhood barbecues was casually stealing from them. Together, we visited Mrs. Jenkins, who immediately recognized the same man from another recording. By the end of the afternoon, 4 separate families had identified missing deliveries matching footage from my camera. That's when we agreed it was time to stop playing detective and let actual detectives do their jobs. I contacted the Scottsdale Police Department, explained that I had multiple cloud recordings connected to several reported thefts, and was transferred to Detective Alan Brooks. Unlike television detectives, he didn't make dramatic speeches. He simply asked careful questions. "Do you still have the original files?" "Yes." "Can you verify timestamps?" "Yes." "Have these videos been edited?" "No." "Can you preserve everything exactly as recorded?" "Already done." He thanked me, asked me not to discuss the investigation publicly, and arranged to collect digital copies the following morning. Before leaving, he looked at my front door and smiled. Interesting that someone wanted this camera removed. That sentence echoed in my head long after he drove away. 4 days passed before Detective Brooks called back. "Mr. Carter," he said, "we've matched several incidents with delivery records and witness statements. We have enough to move forward." He couldn't tell me everything, but he confirmed investigators believe Richard had stolen packages from multiple homes over several weeks. Restitution estimates already exceeded $8,000. After hanging up, I sat quietly on my back patio watching Cooper chase lizards across the yard. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt disappointed because this wasn't some anonymous criminal. This was someone who lived 3 streets away. Someone people trusted. And then another thought hit me. If Monica knew about her husband's behavior, suddenly her obsession with removing neighborhood cameras made terrifying sense. I couldn't prove she knew, and I refused to invent accusations without evidence. But I couldn't ignore the timing either. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening, and homeowners were already planning to attend because of recent dues increases. I placed my binder containing the corporate filings beside another folder holding copies of the police report reference numbers and video documentation. I wasn't planning to accuse anyone of crimes during that meeting. The police would handle that. My job was much simpler. I was going to ask one question in front of every homeowner in Desert Ridge. One question based entirely on public records that nobody could dismiss as opinion. If the association had no legal authority for 9 months, then exactly who had been taking everyone's money during those 9 months? Walking into that clubhouse carrying 2 folders instead of 1, I realized the camera Monica wanted removed had already done something far more valuable than protect my front porch. It had protected the truth, and in just a few minutes, everyone in that room was about to find out exactly how expensive the truth could become. I barely slept the night before the meeting, not because I was nervous about speaking in public, but because I kept wondering how many people sitting in that room had written checks they never legally owed. Tuesday evening, the clubhouse filled up faster than I'd ever seen. Couples whispered to each other. Neighbors complained about landscaping fees, and the board members sat at the long table wearing the same confident expressions they always did. Monica smiled politely as she shuffled paperwork, and for just a second I wondered if she had any idea what was about to happen. When the homeowner comment period finally opened, I stood, picked up my binder, and walked to the front. "Evening, everyone. I'm Daniel Carter from Cedar Lane. I actually came to discuss my security camera violation, but while researching that issue, I found something I think every homeowner deserves to see." The room became noticeably quieter. Monica folded her hands together and gave me the kind of rehearsed smile people use when they expect to shut someone down quickly. "Please keep your comments relevant, Mr. Carter." I nodded. "Absolutely." Then I held up the certified documents from the Arizona Corporation Commission and began reading the filing dates aloud. Incorporation status, renewal deadline, expiration date, administrative dissolution notice. Nobody interrupted because every page came directly from a government agency. When I finished, I looked directly at the board and asked one simple question. If Desert Ridge Community Association stopped existing as a valid legal entity 9 months ago, who exactly has been collecting our dues and issuing legally binding fines ever since? You could almost hear people stop breathing. A man in the 3rd row quietly asked his wife if he'd heard me correctly. Someone else stood up demanding to see the documents. The board treasurer grabbed his laptop with shaking hands while Monica suddenly looked far less confident than she had 5 minutes earlier. She tried to explain that it was probably an administrative oversight and everything would be corrected soon, but the room had already turned. Homeowners weren't listening anymore. They were asking how much money had been collected, whether recent fines were enforceable, whether the board had informed anyone. Within minutes, people who had barely spoken to one another before the meeting were comparing violation letters and special assessments. The orderly meeting dissolved into complete chaos, and after less than 20 minutes, the board voted to adjourn because they had completely lost control of the room. I gathered my binder, thanked a few neighbors, and quietly walked outside. I never mentioned Richard. I never mentioned the investigation. That wasn't my story to tell. 2 mornings later, my phone rang while I was making breakfast. Detective Brooks. His voice was calm as always. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to let you know we've made an arrest." Richard had been charged with multiple counts of package theft after investigators matched the videos with delivery records, witness statements, and recovered property. He later agreed to restitution totaling just over $8,400 and accepted probation as part of a plea agreement. The detective thanked me again for preserving the original recordings exactly as they were captured. Before hanging up, he added something that stayed with me. If that camera had come down when they demanded it, we probably never would have had this case. The next morning, an email appeared in every homeowner's inbox. Monica Hayes had resigned from the board effective immediately, offering only personal reasons and nothing more. No apology, no explanation, just gone. Over the following weeks, everything changed. The remaining board members hired independent legal counsel, reinstated the association properly, voided every fine issued after the nonprofit registration expired, refunded my camera penalty along with every certified mailing expense I paid, and scheduled open financial reviews for every homeowner who wanted answers. Even better, one of the first amendments adopted by the newly elected board explicitly protected homeowners' rights to install standard security cameras facing their own property. Ironically, the very device Monica tried so hard to ban ended up becoming officially encouraged throughout the neighborhood. Today, Cooper is a little older. The trees along Cedar Lane are taller, and that same doorbell camera is still mounted exactly where it's always been. Sometimes when delivery drivers walk away, I catch myself smiling because I remember how close I came to taking it down just to avoid the hassle. Looking back, I don't think this story was ever really about an HOA, a package thief, or even a security camera. It was about what happens when ordinary people stop assuming authority is always right and start asking for documentation instead. Paperwork doesn't get emotional. Video doesn't play favorites. Facts don't care who sits at the head of the boardroom table. Those things have a funny way of catching up with people who believe nobody will ever check. Richard eventually moved away. Monica sold her house a few months later, and life in Desert Ridge slowly returned to being the quiet neighborhood I'd hoped for when I first moved in. But every now and then, a new neighbor asks why so many houses on our street have doorbell cameras, and I usually just smile and say, let's just say we learned the hard way that sometimes the safest community is the one where the truth has somewhere to hide until it's finally needed. So now I'm curious what you think. If you had been in my position, would you have simply paid the fine and removed the camera to keep the peace? Or would you have kept digging once something stopped making sense? And do you think Monica knew exactly why those cameras bothered her so much? Or was it all just an incredible coincidence? Let me know in the comments because I genuinely love to hear where you stand. And if you've ever watched paperwork and patience accomplish what arguing never could, share your story too. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real community justice stories, and I'll see you in the next one.